we have been talking about the 4 paths of experiencing God in the creation spirituality tradition, based mostly on Matthew Fox's book, Original Blessing, that I'm reading from this morning. And so we have been through the Via Positiva and the Via Negativa. Today we find ourselves in the Via Creativa. We have now traveled along 2 paths in the creation-centered spiritual journey. That of the Via Positiva and that of the Via Negativa. That of cosmic blessing and our own royal personhood, and that of darkness, silence, and emptiness. Because this tradition pays equal heed to both the Via Positiva and the Via Negativa, it celebrates the union of the 2 in the Via Creativa. In letting both pleasure and pain happen, both light and darkness, both naming and unnaming, both cosmos and void, we allow a 3rd thing to be born. And that 3rd thing is the very power of birth itself. It is the creative energy of God erupting out of humanity's imagination. It is the image of God, the image of the Creator, coming alive and expressing its divine depths and divine fruitfulness. It is our creativity, which is the full meaning of humanity's being an image of God.
Today's reading is from Genesis. God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, to be like us. Let them be stewards of the fish in the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle, the wild animals, everything that crawls on the ground." Humankind was created as God's reflection. In a divine image, God created them. Male and female, God made them.
Would you pray with me? Creative energy. You are not only around us, but within us. May we touch that this morning, be aware of that energy, that spirit. May it fill us, help us to have greater understanding of ourselves and of this world, and to birth more beauty and more light, more love and more compassion into the broken world around us. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your grace and your wisdom. Amen. So I'm going to begin by saying something that you've all heard me say before, which is that we are all creative. We are all creative. I know that we hear that word and we want to put it in this, pigeonhole it into art and the arts and feel like, well, I'm not creative if I don't paint like Monet and I don't write like J.K. Rowling and I don't do poetry like Robert Frost did and I don't sing like Celine Dion and Josh Groban, therefore I am not creative. But it's not the case. We are all creative, and it comes in many more forms than that. So let's start there. Where else do we express our creativity? Every day. Problem solving. Absolutely. Cooking. Gardening and family traditions. Where else? Sorry? Sewing. Hobbies, raising children. Teaching children. Children's time. What about just our relationships in general? The creativity we can bring to that. Decorating our homes. Shirley's not here, but clearly she was the essence of dressing creatively. God bless Shirley. Beth.
I don't know if someone said this at the beginning, but figuring out a problem.
Yeah, figuring out problems. Pat beat you to it, but that's all right. We'll take it again because it's an important one. So yes, all of those things. Every day you are creative. That's part of what Fox reminds us of and what the scripture reminded us of, that we are the imago Dei. We are the image of God. We are the reflection of God. And as such, we are creators, creatresses, as God is. Not just God was. There wasn't just like one creation event and then creation stopped forever. Creation continues, and we continue to be creative with it. And we do a disservice when we say there was only one creator, and that was it. We give part of our divine self away. We give that power of creativity away. And so the Via Creativa is part of reclaiming some of that, but perhaps in a slightly different way. Because we can't really say, well, we've only really mastered the spiritual path if we can, do all kinds of wonderful things like paint like Jerry Belland and poetry like Diane and, sew quilts like Sue. If we've, reached the ultimate in some of these creative realms, then we've got the spiritual path down. No, we can't say that. The spiritual path, especially when we're talking about creation spirituality, and what Fox is talking about is saying that the Via Creativa is about creating ourselves. It's about our very souls. It's about our own growth and our own learning. It's about taking the two paths that we've talked about and bringing them into unity with one another, balancing them, perhaps, if you will, weaving them together, the light and the dark, into a rich tapestry of beautiful fabrics, and threads, and colors. That's what brings wholeness and light. We have the Via Positiva, which was all about, did anybody remember the three pieces? I ran into Sandy afterwards. She said, I thought you were going to quiz us. I'm like, darn it, I should have. Missed my chance. She had them all down. Via Positiva was about affirmation, right? Reminding us that we're good. We are inherently good. And about Thanksgiving, especially by going out into nature and allowing ourselves to soak up the beauty of nature so that we feel that deep, deep sense of gratitude within us. And it was about ecstasy and pleasure and not saying, oh, that feels good, must be sinful. It was about saying, God created it and it feels good, let's celebrate it. Let's enjoy it. But if we only, and we need the Via Positiva, we need that to create, delight, beauty, and all those wonderful things. But if that's the only path we have, then it's all, rainbows and unicorns. And there's no depth. There's no balance. And so we need the Via Negativa. We need the darkness to create. I mean, the stars were created in darkness, and babies are created in darkness, and thoughts are created in darkness, and liberation is created in the oppressive darkness in the world. So we need the darkness to create the struggle and we need to enter it. Whatever comes our way, the grief and the anger and the pain and the wounding, we need to enter the darkness and not pretend it doesn't exist. No, I only like rainbows and unicorns. I'm going to live over here. No, I like rainbows and unicorns, but really right now my life is not there. And I'm living in the dark forest. And the dark forest is part of the world too. And so we enter it. And we explore it. And we find the messages that are there, and the teachings that are there, and we grow in depth there. But if we live there, then perhaps we become someone who is negative all the time, or is a perpetual victim forever, or someone who is critical constantly, someone who really leads a fairly sad life because there are no unicorns and rainbows. And those things are really cool. The Via Creativa says that we've walked both of those other paths. The light and the lightness and the delight, but also the suffering and the pain. We've walked through them, and we've learned from them, we've been aware of them, and we're now bringing them together. And our souls are growing because of them. And we create a beautiful, healthy, whole self because we've brought them together. You know, Carl Jung said you've got to bring the shadow side along. You've got to weave the shadow side into the light side to have a whole person, to have healing happen. You can't just ignore one or the other. There have been commandments that Matthew Fox has set forth for each of the paths. The commandment for the Via Creativa is, I will not be reluctant to give birth. I will not be reluctant to give birth. That commandment came from the diary of psychologist Otto Rank. He wrote it when he was 16 years old. He had been sexually abused as a boy and had often considered committing suicide as a teenager. And that mantra became his alternative to committing suicide. I will not be reluctant to give birth. And clearly we're not talking about birthing a baby, we're talking about birthing oneself, about creating in life. And that mantra for him was so successful that he eventually went on to help to heal and to liberate other wounded artists. He's the one who said that that pessimism is the repression of creativity. Pessimism is the repression of creativity. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know, well, when we repress our creativity, I think it's because we repress our very selves. I mean, that's what the Via Creativa is saying. It's saying we accept the light parts of us, and we accept the dark parts of ourselves, and we're willing to grow something out of all of that. That's the Via Creativity. But if we've repressed that, it's because we've repressed other parts of ourselves. Because we won't let them bear fruit. And we repress parts of ourselves because we don't feel like we're worthy. We don't feel like we're good enough. What'd you say, Jim? Catholic. No, unfortunately, it's more than that. There have been a lot of good Lutherans and Methodists who have felt the same way. And so we get stuck there, and then we're afraid to create. All of it takes a lot of self-awareness. The spiritual path is always and forever about self-awareness. It's not about following a doctrine or a dogma or a rule or a ritual. That might be what religion is about. A religious path is about. But a spiritual path is interior. And so it's about delving in and going inside. And when I taught my Religion 1000 class at Carthage for a number of years, the first thing I had the students do was write a personal reflection essay. I asked asked them to sort of reflect on their lives and the things that had helped to shape them the most. Those times that had been most meaningful for them, positive and negative, in creating who they were. And to look at where God was in all of it, and who God was for them, and where God was during those times. Not really an easy essay to start with. But we were going down a path of talking about all of the world religions, of exploring different thought processes, of exploring Christianity and the history and the traditions and all of that richness. You've got to know where you start from, right? You know, anytime you pick up your GPS and you type in somewhere to go, well, it wants to know where you're starting from. But how many times do people take off on a path and not analyze where we are? What do I really think about God right now? What were the main events in my life that shaped me into who I am right now? And how do they still impact me? I had some kids who were great about it. And I knew that those were the ones with a little more depth and insight. And perhaps had pushed through more dark forests than others. And then there were others that I think really had no clue what I was asking. And perhaps someday they'd get there, but that's not where they were at the time. Julia Cameron, who's an artist and a creativity workshop leader, has written a couple of books on creativity. One's called The Vein of Gold. And in that, she talks about how she takes her students and she has them write a personal timeline, a narrative timeline of their lives. Somewhere between 5,000 and 25,000 words. Just a lot. But her intent, and she said they're supposed to do it quickly and without editing. You know, write down your life and everything that happened. In order to give one sort of an objective perspective. Perhaps to see patterns, to see things that you might have forgotten or might otherwise gloss over. And so she had them start by, just jotting notes and then flowing that into a narrative. Well, there's a woman named Suzanne. And in starting to write down these notes, she was back in her 20s and she wrote down how her sister had died accidentally. And then in continuing to write down notes, she noticed that after that point, a lot of the things that she enjoyed doing in life, she stopped doing. And she noticed the guilt and the grief that happened after her sister's death. And she started to think about the joy that she'd experienced with her sister, but how when she pretty much packed up her sister's clothes, she packed up all of the enjoyment with her. And as she started to write the narrative from those notes, it all sort of became illuminated for her. And her heart began to shift and to open. And she started to think, well, all of those records that we used to enjoy listening to, that I packed away and I've never listened to again, why couldn't I? Couldn't we? Could I listen to them again now? And, this is 20 years after her sister's death, but 20 years later, could she still take that trip to Paris that the two of them had talked about taking? And she realized she could. And she did. And so at one point with her sister's death, she'd sort of let herself die as well. And now in looking back at it and seeing it in a new light, she was reclaiming herself and her future. It was as if in that whole process process, she found the joy of the Via Positiva, and she walked through the darkness of the Via Negativa, and she was giving birth to something new, to a new self that incorporated all of it, didn't deny any of it, but gave birth to a new person and a new path and a new way of living. That's sort of the intent of all of this. So, that giving birth to something new. There was a Duke Ellington story that came up that said that one time he used the energy of pouting and turned it into the blues. You know, it was a way of consciously channeling creative energy. He took all the beauty and the good that he knew of music and that positive path, but he took all of the sadness that was in his life and he brought it together in some amazing music. He birthed something new. It all takes, again, self-awareness and reflection on ourselves and a willingness to want to delve deeper. You know, if we get stuck in our egos and our self-centeredness, or if we get stuck in self-loathing and the sinfulness that some of us have been taught by religion, if we get stuck in that place, what do we create? What comes forth from us in our lives? Do you ever wonder why we create weapons of mass destruction? Why we create instruments of torture? Why do we create hate groups and songs that are filled with hatred? Why do we create laws and policies that oppress instead of honor, diversity, and difference? Where does that come from? If not an interior hatred of self, unworthiness of self, pain and suffering and struggle that hasn't been walked through and worked on. But if we work to incorporate all of it, if we can affirm ourselves, even when we screw up, at the core of me there is still good, to affirm ourselves, to know gratitude and thanksgiving, to enjoy pleasure as a gift of God. If we can know that and know that our pain and our struggle is part of life, and it's ours to let go, to let be, to learn from, to grow from, if we incorporate all of it, instead of repressing any of it, then we create a beautiful, more whole person. And it's not a one-time shot, because our lives keep happening. And so we keep creating, and we keep learning, and we keep growing. So here's my question of the day to send you forward. If we are the Imago Dei, if we are the image and the reflection of God, if, as 1 Corinthians 3 says, we are co-workers with God, not employees, not slaves, if we are co-workers, standing with God, with our own thoughts, with our own abilities, with our own imagination, with God. Pretend that for a second. You're standing there with God, goddess, energy, whatever you want to call it. What will you create? What would God or goddess or light or love have you create? Because I know it will be something filled with compassion, love, grace, forgiveness, creativity.